Well, a big focus, as per our sources, Prime Minister Modi will meet Bangladesh Chief Advisor Mohammad Yunus today for the first time since the interim government took charge after the ouster of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina just last July. Prime Minister Modi and Bangladesh Chief Advisor Mohammad Yunus were actually seated together, as you can see in those visuals, at a dinner hosted along the sidelines of the BIMSTEC summit in Thailand's Bangkok. This is from Thursday evening. The Prime Minister was seen seated between Mr. Yunus and Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli. This comes amid a stress in bilateral relations between New Delhi and Dhaka following the ouster of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina on the 5th of August last year, also in the light of the treatment of minorities in Bangladesh. In fact, Dhaka had requested a bilateral meeting on the sidelines of this BIMSTEC summit in Bangkok to sort out differences, but Prime Minister Modi, scheduled in Thailand, did not mention the requested meeting. In fact, the Ministry of External Affairs is yet to confirm the development, but as per our sources, Prime Minister Modi will meet Bangladesh Chief Advisor Mohammad Yunus today for the first time since the interim government took charge in Dhaka and after the ouster of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Prime Minister Modi and Mohammad Yunus were seated together at a dinner hosted along the sidelines of the BIMSTEC summit in Bangkok. In fact, the Prime Minister was seen seated between Mr. Yunus and Nepal's Prime Minister. My colleague Vishal Vivek has been tracking the finer developments in Bangkok for us. He joins us live at the moment. Vishal, besides the key takeaways from the 6th BIMSTEC summit, also take us through what we know regarding this meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Bangladesh's Mohammad Yunus. We are given to understand that the Ministry of External Affairs is yet to confirm the development.
That is correct. So it's yet to be confirmed from the Indian side. No official statement from the Indian side about the meeting, supposed meeting between Bangladesh's leader Mohammad Yunus and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. But there have been many reports in the last 24 hours from the Bangladeshi media side particularly that say that there will be a meeting today. And we have also confirmed from the Bangladeshi side that there will be a meeting, but there's no clarity when exactly the meeting would be. It could be after the main summit is over or before. That remains to be seen. And also on the other hand, as you mentioned, there could be another meeting between the two PMs, PM Modi and PM KP Sharma Oli. There have been no meetings for almost a year now. Last time they met was in September in New York, I think. So two important meetings could happen today on the stage of BIMSTEC, on the sidelines of BIMSTEC, and BIMSTEC itself is in focus because we've been saying that it needs to step up. It's been around for about 3 decades now, but it hardly has any visibility. People actually don't know about it. There have been many criticisms around the summit that even the full form of BIMSTEC itself is too hard to remember and pronounce. So those are one of the things that even experts have been telling. So all of that will be in focus when the meeting starts at 10 a.m. local time here, which would be about 11:30 for guys in India.
As always, Vishal, thanks so much for joining us with the lowdown. In fact, for further clarity, we also have with us Strategic Affairs expert Brahma Chalani on the broadcast. As always, sir, thank you so much for making time out for us. This meeting on the sidelines of the BIMSTEC summit in Bangkok, we know it will be significant as it follows months of tensions between Dhaka and Delhi over attacks on minorities and also Sheikh Hasina's continued stay in Delhi. Are you optimistic about the outcome, sir?
The timing is rather odd because Yunus has made no course correction. His alliance with Islamists continues. He has released terrorists and violent Islamists from jail. 174 prisoners linked to outlawed militant outfits like the ISIS-linked JAMB have been released by the Yunus regime. The human rights situation in Bangladesh remains grim. In fact, the Bangladesh Army Chief, General Zaman, said a few weeks ago that, quote-unquote, we are going through a chaotic situation. This is the reality, that Bangladesh has descended into jihadist chaos. And to make matters worse, Mr. Yunus is whipping up anti-India sentiment in Bangladesh and also working with India's adversaries. The Yunus regime a few weeks ago hosted an ISI delegation. The ISI delegation came on a secret visit.
Right.
And then in about 2 weeks from now, the Yunus regime will be hosting Pakistan's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, Mr. Ishaq Dar. And as we all know that Mr. Yunus just recently went to China, where on Chinese soil, he made some unfriendly remarks about India, especially about India's northeastern region, the seven sister states in India's northeast. So given that background, the timing of this meeting, bilateral meeting between Yunus and Prime Minister Modi, seems a bit odd.
Right, as always, sir, thank you so much for joining us with your views. We will, of course, keep in touch with you for regular updates and also to discuss the outcomes of this meeting. Well, as sir mentioned as well, Mr. Yunus's comments about including India's northeastern region and Bhutan, Nepal and Bangladesh as an extension of the Chinese economy during a visit to Beijing have led to misgivings in Delhi. So all eyes will be on this meeting and the impact that it's had on diplomatic relations and whether there's a thaw as well. With that, let's turn our attention to the other big story we're tracking. US stock markets have plunged after President Donald Trump's drastic tariffs ignited fears of wider economic turmoil. In fact, the S&P 500, it notched its biggest drop since 2020 as investors came to terms with the scope of Trump's assault on global trade. Major companies like Nike, Apple and Target saw sharp losses. In fact, just to understand what kind of losses we witnessed, Apple, which relies on overseas production, actually lost more than $300 billion in market value, its largest single-day wipeout ever. Commodity prices slumped and the dollar wiped out all of its post-election gains. The trade salvo also led to many experts slashing their growth projections for the United States. In fact, some now predict a recession this year and hike inflation forecasts as well. Trump, though, defended his move, saying it would boost the economy. But China and the EU have vowed retaliation, warning of higher duties on American goods. In fact, the World Trade Organization, meanwhile, expressed concern, predicting a 1% drop in global trade volumes. Traders now fear the tariffs could stoke inflation and slow growth, as I mentioned. But Donald Trump says he's continuing with his approach and the markets will eventually boom. Listen in to Trump's remarks, followed by my colleague Mitch McCann's report from New York.
Well, I mean, it's to be expected. This is a patient that was very sick. We really inherited a terrible economy, as you know, with a lot of problems, including loss of manufacturing and plants closed up all over the country. You know, we've lost 90,000 plants since NAFTA, if you think of that. 90,000, it's not even believable, and about 6 million jobs. And so it was a sick patient. It went through an operation on Liberation Day, and it's going to be a booming country, a very booming country. It's going to be amazing, actually, and we see it because we have trillions of dollars committed to come in, trillions.
Thursday marked the worst day for markets since the height of the coronavirus pandemic 5 years ago. The Dow Jones fell 1,679 points, its worst day since June 2020. The S&P 500 was down 4.84%, also its worst day since June 2020. And the Nasdaq was down as well, 5.97%, its worst day since March of 2020. Now, despite the turbulence on the markets, Donald Trump says he's determined to continue with his approach, saying things are going very well. On Thursday, he said to reporters the markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, and the country is going to boom. There were broad sell-offs across the market on Thursday, but let's start with some of the tech stocks that we've been looking at. Apple, which makes a number of its devices throughout Asia, finished down 9.25%. Meta was down 8.96% and Amazon was down 8.98%. Also affected were sportswear brands, many of whom make their products in Vietnam, Indonesia and China. Nike, for example, which reportedly makes 25% of its shoes in Vietnam, finished down 14.44% at the closing bell in New York. Adidas was down 10% and Puma was down 11.84%. So a difficult day, a turbulent day, a brutal day on the US markets. Mitch McCann, NDTV, New York.
Well, world markets have plunged following Trump's announcement of these widespread reciprocal tariffs. But Canada has announced limited countermeasures in response to Donald Trump's new tariffs. Prime Minister Mark Carney called the move a tragedy for global trade and said Canada would impose a 25% tariff on non-compliant US vehicle imports. However, auto parts and Mexican content will be exempt. This is what he has said. The countermeasure applies to $25.3 billion worth of imports and adds to previous Canadian tariffs on nearly $60 billion of US goods. Mr. Carney warned that while the US may eventually shift its approach, it could take time. But Trump's new tariffs, including that 10% baseline levy on all US imports, have already rattled global markets, as Mitch McCann was reporting as well. For the latest from Canada, let's go across to Vancouver. Maha Siddiqui joins us live at the moment. Maha, this trade war comes as Canada is in the midst of a federal election campaign. Take us through the latest developments.
Yes, absolutely. And this issue has overtaken all other domestic issues as far as the election campaign is concerned. Right now, the focus of all the political parties here is on the trade war with the US, and they are all announcing measures that they would take if they come to power in Canada against the US, especially the Donald Trump administration and the tariffs that he's imposing. So this trade war is well and truly underway, and Canada is responding. And how? Now, Prime Minister Mark Carney has already said that 25% tariff will be levied on fully made cars coming in from the US. About 10% of the cars that come from the US that is exported from the US to Canada are non-CUSMA compliant. CUSMA is the agreement between US, Mexico and Canada. It is a done agreement. The agreement was earlier known as NAFTA, and that agreement was renegotiated during Donald Trump's previous tenure and is now known as CUSMA in Canada. Now, if the vehicles are non-compliant with CUSMA, then they will be levied with 25% tariff, and any foreign part, for instance, which is not part of this trade agreement between the three countries, will be separate levied with a tariff. So, for instance, if the steering wheel of a car is made, say, in Japan, then only that steering wheel will be that the value of that will be tariff.
Right.
So clearly, what this will generate, as Mark Carney's office points out, is $8 billion annually, which they are saying they will invest in the workers and the industry that is being affected because of the US tariff. And this is a big issue, especially in the Ontario province, wherein Windsor, Stellantis, has already paused their production.
As always, Maha, thank you so much for joining us with the latest details. By the way, Republican Senator Chuck Grassley has introduced a bill requiring congressional approval for new tariffs just a day after President Trump announced these sweeping import taxes. The bipartisan Trade Review Act of 2025 would block tariffs unless Congress signs off within 60 days. And this move signals growing dissent among Republicans as some lawmakers worry about economic fallout and impacts on allies like Israel as well. However, with Republicans controlling both chambers of Congress, the bill is unlikely to pass. Trump argues that tariffs will boost federal revenue and bring manufacturing back to the US, but economists, they remain quite skeptical at this stage. And with that, let's turn our attention to the devastation in Myanmar. Extreme heat and heavy rain in Myanmar could cause disease outbreaks among earthquake survivors camping in the open. This is what global aid bodies are warning. They've complicated the rescue efforts made difficult by a civil war, as well as the death toll there surpassed 3,000. Last Friday, 7.7 magnitude quake, one of Myanmar's strongest in a century, jolted a region home to 28 million, toppling buildings, as you can see on your screens, such as hospitals, flattening communities, and leaving many without food, many without water and shelter. The World Health Organization flagged a rising risk of cholera and other diseases in the worst affected areas, such as Mandalay, while it prepared $1 million of relief supplies, which actually includes body bags. Meanwhile, in other news, a deadly storm system sweeping across the United States now from Texas to Ohio. It's killed at least 7 people and left over a dozen injured. Tornadoes have hit areas in Tennessee, in Mississippi, and other states in the United States too. Well, the National Weather Service there warned of generational floods in the US South and Midwest as tornadoes swept the country from Texas to Michigan. About 15 million people in the US are under tornado watches from Ohio to Mississippi, and nearly 6 million people are under the watch, including people from Nashville and Tennessee. News and updates continue in a moment right after this very short commercial break. Do stay tuned. Meanwhile, a federal judge in the US has temporarily blocked Donald Trump's administration from cutting more than $11 billion in public health grants allocated to US states during the COVID-19 pandemic. But this ruling by US District Judge Mary S. McElroy in Rhode Island bars the US Department of Health and Human Services, as well as its agencies, from implementing the cuts while the litigation plays out. The grant funding was actually used by states to track and prevent and control infectious diseases, including measles and bird flu, as well as track mental health services and also fund addiction treatment. To Afghanistan now, where more than 200 health facilities run by the World Health Organization, providing medical care for 1.84 million people, have closed or ceased operations after the US aid cuts announced by the Trump administration shut off life-saving medical care, including vaccinations, maternal and child health services. On his first day in office in January, Donald Trump had announced an immediate freeze on all US foreign assistance, including more than $40 billion for international projects coming from USAID, which is the United States Agency for International Development. It was later confirmed that more than 80% of USAID programs had been cancelled. To understand the impact in Afghanistan further, we have with us live from Washington, D.C., Holly McKay at the moment. Holly, thanks so much for making time for us. The WHO has clearly warned that in Afghanistan, where health clinics have actually closed in 28 out of the 34 provinces, this is leading to a grave escalating humanitarian crisis.
This is certainly really heartbreaking news. Afghanistan was already one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world, and this is undoubtedly making it significantly worse. And a big problem with these aid cuts is that over the 20-year US-led occupation in Afghanistan, the country became very reliant upon outside NGOs, outside funding, and outside groups to really bolster and keep its healthcare infrastructure alive. And so with these abrupt cuts, there are certainly many lives at stake. And I think it's important to remember that this really does go beyond politics. These are human beings and people that are in some of the most rural and some of the poorest communities who are already suffering, who are just going to be suffering even more.
Right. Afghanistan, by the way, Holly, just for the benefit of our viewers, has already seen a rise in polio cases due to restrictions that were imposed by the Taliban on its vaccination program. What's worse is that the WHO says the availability of healthcare for Afghans may now worsen even further. Holly, so on ground zero, are people pessimistic about how this might play out?
Yeah, I think Afghans have already been through so much over the past 25 years, and this is just another huge blow to what they're already enduring. I think we'll also see a really big hit to maternal care, to babies, to newborns, to mothers. And that is one of the most heartbreaking components of it, is that Afghanistan already is one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world. And this will no doubt exacerbate that. And it's painful to see what they have to go through. And I can only hope that other countries, other organizations, other groups can donate, can somehow play a part in bridging that gap. And hopefully United States will at some point be able to resume that funding, because as I said, it really is human lives over politics.
Well, Holly, as you've so appropriately put it, this goes beyond politics. Thank you so much for joining us with that update. We will, of course, keep in touch with you for regular updates on Afghanistan. Meanwhile, Hungary will leave the International Criminal Court because it has become political. This is what the country's Prime Minister Viktor Orban said as he welcomed his Israeli counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu, the subject of an ICC arrest warrant, to Budapest for an official visit. Standing beside Netanyahu at the start of the 4-day visit, Orban said Hungary was convinced the otherwise very important court had diminished into a political forum. Meanwhile, I must also inform you that hundreds of thousands of fleeing Gazans sought shelter in one of the biggest mass displacements of the war as Israeli forces advanced into the ruins of the city of Rafah, part of a newly announced security zone they intend to seize. A day after declaring their intention to capture large parts of the crowded enclave, Israeli forces pushed into the city on Gaza's southern edge, which had served as a last refuge for people fleeing other areas for much of the war. In fact, Israel has expanded its operations and seized Rafah's new security zone. Many are now fleeing this area. Hundreds of thousands are still in need of dire aid. These are the scenes emerging from the enclave as we speak, as Israeli forces advance into the ruins of the city of Rafah, part of a newly announced security zone they intend to seize. Thank you for investing your time in watching this edition of The World 24/7. As always, we'll keep tracking all the latest updates for you. Do stay tuned.